I think some aspect of this transition toward a more functional human relationship with the planet and each other has to be based in values. I wrote on the blog recently, I did a little thought experiment where suppose we get the perfect energy source. Someone comes up with fusion, superfusion, or the perfect solar panel. You know, Saran wrap is now a solar panel. It's cheap. And we get that, and then suddenly we've basically tripled or quadrupled the carrying capacity of the planet, because you can, again, energy is, you can desalinate seawater, you can you can grow boundless crops if you have abundant energy, you can move everywhere. So we can kind of paper over the planet with solar panels and be happy and have a, but is that a good society? Is that a good planet? Is that a good species? Is that appropriate use of technology? So even if we've solved the quote-unquote climate problem, that doesn't mean we've solved anything. So without values, a combination of an evolution of values that from a place where for several hundred years, at least as a species, we've been locked into this sort of, as I call it, the cow tipping phase of our lives. You know, wow, look what I can do. The teen frat boy, adrenaline, testosterone phase to some more reasoned relationship with resources and also more reasoned sense of equity. Because again, the other world we can head toward is Robert Cates and the others who wrote this really interesting report a few years ago called The Great Transition. We face fortress world, which is the enabled have what they want, and they're like in Sao Paulo where you fly your helicopter from your gated compound to your skyscraper and back and forth around seas of utter poverty and lack of stuff. Or we have something different, and that's, you know, we could, without values, the North-South question will not be resolved. And by the way, the climate problem, the negotiations through the rest of this year toward Copenhagen, if the whole issue has reverted to where it was in 1990, going back toward the Earth Summit, which is the North did the pollution so far, and now you're telling us we can't use our fossil fuels? What are you talking about? You pay for it, and we'll change our ways. And even when it comes to China, that's still the same dynamic. So how does that get resolved without some new commitment by those who have and who have obtained the things they have using fossil fuels to give something to make a transition elsewhere more feasible?
You're the economist, but it seems to me that where we probably disagree is that saving the planet is whatever, how you want to say it, or controlling, or whatever the right word is, doing the right thing by the planet in the way we behave is a daunting task. But legislating values, especially cross-culturally, is even harder.
I never meant to legislate. They must grow like a seed planted in fertile soil.
Yeah, but now you're dreaming. In other words, you're dreaming. There is no spontaneous combustion of shared values on this subject. So what drives it? You ask what drives it. First of all, this apocalyptic vision of the unrecognizable world doesn't concern me, because my grandfather would have found this world unrecognizable. Right. You know, totally unrecognizable. I mean, just think of the cell phone, right? Just think of people walking down the street talking to no one. Just that vision of human behavior, unrecognizable. He would born in 1883. He would no more have recognized 1983 than our grandchildren will. So it's going to be unrecognizable in some way. The question is, can we adapt? Is it livable? And what are the values we live in? So my view is the self-interest question, the Saran wrap example, right? So let's say we have this. I would rather think, it's intuitive because I know nothing about it, so I really apply way out of my league here, that the Saran wrap example, right, is great because in some sense, it responds to an economic and practical need to generate the energy for the amenities, whatever we call them. You call them amenities, right? You call them amenities. I call them essentials. So let's not disagree. But it's food and whatever lifestyle. Yeah. Now the question is, we're not going to reinforce a puritanical lifestyle easily without some charismatic apocalyptic vision. So there might be an environmental messiah of some kind that creates a movement of poverty, where the meek shall inherit the earth and so forth. It's possible. Unfortunately, it's possible. But it also is true that the technology, if it's used, could be, it is in some sense, it's contingent how it's used because it responds to it's an ingenious way of solving a problem. Now, how that problem is solved may not involve papering the world over with this. Take the elevator, which is my favorite technological innovation. It changed the landscape. The skyscraper is the most important technological change in modern architecture because it allowed to build up plausibly. And it was in some sense neutral. I don't think human behavior interaction is altered by this technological change. It's the other way around. The values, we have to find a way to have the conversation cross-nationally about the distribution of wealth and the shared necessity. So the environmental predicament is an opportunity to create a political movement that's based not on ideals, but on really self-interest, I would hope.
Yeah, although, again, your definition of self-interest can be broadened by your experience, potentially. You can't say right now that some kid in Bangladesh is preserving that life so he becomes an innovative entrepreneur in his community is in my self-interest. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch. But there is a sense economically that facilitating a smooth transition in countries where you could have a bumpy transition with conflict and mass and famine in parts of Africa that I just wrote about a week ago. Speaking of adaptation, this whole sub-Saharan belt in Africa historically has seen these mega droughts that we've only just become aware of, that there are several centuries in duration, every 500 years or so. It just hasn't been one in the last 500 years. So finding a way to facilitate having Africa not be dysfunctional fundamentally is probably in my self-interest. Again, it's a stretch, but I have a feeling the more you're aware of Africa, the more you're aware that that's probably part of your value sphere. And then, of course, what I do on .earth, and I'm not saying blogs are going to solve the problems of the world, but I just try to remind people every few days, this is a very small little piece of real estate we inhabit, and actually, we all do have self-interest in terms of, passing potential thresholds. As Marty Weitzman would say, we don't know where these thresholds are. I wrote about this recently with tipping points, schmipping points. We don't know where they are. So if you don't know where a tipping point is it a tipping point, or is it a risk not worth heading toward, or worth sort of in a constructive, optimistic way, heading in the other direction, in other words, toward new energy options. And I think in the end, when you see those things and you realize that we're all in the same little bubble, you start to build a broader sense of self-interest. And this gets back to the academy, to the university, the colleges, to schools. As someone said earlier, it's no mistake I've started writing books for young people. You're all young people, many of you are young, but for kids as well as grown-ups. If we're not focused down the chain as well, I think we're losing the battle.
But I think, it's harder than you think.
I know.
Many people who have been associated with the environmental movement, who have the right values, are not altogether tolerant of looking at certain kinds of analytical tools about what's right and what's wrong. I think this is the nostalgia part of it.